Change, change, change.
We're living through the biggest crisis of our lifetimes.
As the campaign frontrunners make their final push to become Prime Minister, the NDP and Bloc Québécois leaders fight to hold the balance of power.
Sadly, the Bloc is basically a useless party.
In a few days from now, I might tell myself, I won't miss this guy.
It's day 34 of the federal election campaign, and Power in Politics starts right now. With just a few days remaining in this race, Liberal leader Mark Carney took his campaign to Ontario today, where the party holds nearly half of their current seats. Carney began north in Sault Ste. Marie at a steel factory, where he vowed to stand up for workers hit by President Donald Trump's tariffs. He then turned to Western Ontario with a whistle stop in Georgetown. And this hour, he's in Cambridge, meeting with local Liberal candidates. And tonight, Carney is scheduled to hold a rally in London.
We can control our economic destiny with the right plan. A plan that uses overwhelming force to overcome the anxieties that people naturally feel, to break through the fog of uncertainty that businesses face, and above all, to replace what the crisis is taking away.
While Carney's main rival says this election is about change, Carney says it's about Trump and who will stand up for Canadians. The CBC's Ashley Burke is traveling with the Liberal leader. Ashley.
David, with just days to go until the election, Liberal leader Mark Carney is focusing on vote-rich Ontario. To win the strong mandate he's after, his party needs to do well here. So the Liberals are playing both defense and offense. Carney visited a steel plant in Sault Ste. Marie that's ground zero for Donald Trump's trade war and tried to hammer home his message that he's the best option to take on Trump. But he was asked again about his call with the U.S. president last month. This after other party leaders criticized him for not disclosing that Trump brought up Canada becoming the 51st state when they spoke. A source tells CBC News that Carney also called Trump a transformative president on that call when referencing his impact on the global economy. Carney said today it's not okay to have a conversation and reveal all the details. He maintains what's important is the conclusion of the meeting, that he says Trump respected Canada's sovereignty. Carney's headed to London next to try and make gains in NDP territory. But the Liberals and NDP are holding dueling rallies there tonight, just a few kilometers away from each other. David?
Thank you, Ashley. That's the CBC's Ashley Burke in Vaughan, Ontario. While Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is promising voters 100 days of change if he's elected on Monday. Poilievre is out west during this final leg of the campaign, starting this morning in Saskatoon. He stopped in Calgary this afternoon to hold his first of two rallies today. And tonight, he's in Nanaimo, British Columbia, visiting a food bank. He'll hold a second rally just outside the city tonight.
Are we really going to let Mark Carney distract from the inflation, crime, rising housing costs that Liberals would continue to deliver simply because he tells lies to make people afraid of change?
With polls suggesting a sustained Liberal lead, Poilievre is sharpening his attacks against Mark Carney. The CBC's JP Tasker is following the Conservative campaign. JP.
David, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is playing defense in the final days of this campaign, rallying the base in deep blue territory with stops in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Choices that are raising the eyebrows of two Conservative campaign operatives who spoke to CBC News. They say Poilievre should be making a play for voters and swing ridings elsewhere with so little time left before Monday's election. The Conservative campaign, though, is defending the choice, saying they want to hit all 10 provinces with their tough on crime and tax cuts messaging. Poilievre is painting a bleak picture of Canada if the Liberals are re-elected.
Well, everything is at stake. This election is about change. This Liberal path not only means more poverty and hunger and helplessness and homelessness, but it also means more divisions in our country.
The next stop for Poilievre is here in Battleground, BC, where polls suggest the Liberals are poised to make gains. David?
Thank you, JP. That's the CBC's JP Tasker in Vancouver. All right, the election is on Monday, but it's Friday, and that means our party insiders are here. Cheryl Oates was the Director of Communications for former Alberta NDP Premier Rachel Notley, and hanging out in the Ottawa studio together, we got Greg McEachern, who's a former Liberal ministerial advisor, and Fred Delory, a former Conservative campaign manager. Happy Friday, happy last Friday of the election. It's good to see you all. Greg, let's start with you. I mean, what do you make of what we're seeing today, the last couple of days, this final push? You heard Ashley there saying Mark Carney, a mix of offense and defense going into southwestern Ontario in particular. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the advantage of being in a place like southwestern Ontario where there's a lot of neighboring ridings, so you can do an event in a Liberal-held riding, but it's also going to have some spillover or benefit in nearby ridings. That push is really, really important. I think as well, you know, it's hard not to contrast what the Liberal campaign is doing with what the Conservative campaign is doing, and going to held ridings. I was in Nova Scotia earlier this week. And you know, the leader of the Conservatives, you know, took great pains trying not to be in a held riding when the word on the ground, there were two Nova Scotia stories. One I think we might get to later, but the other was that, you know, there's a consideration that at least 2 of the 3 seats the Conservatives hold right now in Nova Scotia are going to be close and going to be tight. You also see the plans for where the Conservative leader is going to be this weekend, and it's a bit of a surprise in some of the ridings he's going to, with MPs that have been very loud and vocal, and then again ending up in his own riding where there's been a lot of speculation this week about how close or how much of a fight he may have to keep his own seat.
Fred, just what are your thoughts on what we're seeing from the Conservative campaign in this stretch run? I mean, it looks to me like Mark Carney, where he's hopscotching, he's hitting ridings where they're looking to grow, right? They are hunting for the majority in what he's doing there. The Pierre Poilievre itinerary is more of a mixed message to me. How do you view it?
Right. They, you know, to their credit, though, they haven't been to Saskatchewan yet in this campaign or to Calgary. I would have done it maybe 2 weeks ago. That kind of lull period in the campaign might have been a good time to go there, not the last weekend. But they are in Nanaimo, which is a very, very competitive area that we're always trying to grow in. The NDP, that's really the last base of support where the NDP are. I think there's 6 or 7 seats on Vancouver Island that they have, and a lot of those are going to fall, and a lot of them are going to fall blue. So it is a mix of offense and defense, there's no question. I know he's in Oakville over the weekend, which is another offensive point they're going on. And they are finishing in Carleton in his riding, which, you know, a big Ottawa rally the night before, you're home anyway. So, you know, I think the next day on Election Day, you may see a lot of clips with a massive rally in Carleton.
Right. So Fred, just to follow up on the Vancouver Island thing, like obviously there's a lot of blue-orange fights there, but you're taking seats away from the NDP, and I know you want to get seats wherever you can, but you're not taking any seats away from the red column out there, right? Like you need to do that in the 905, and it's kind of like a drive-through rather than camp in there.
Yeah, look, I would have gone much more aggressive in the 905 if I was running this campaign, no question. That's where the vast majority of seats are. That's where a lot of competitive seats should be, and that's where the resources should be put. But there are seats to grow in certain areas, and you do need to hit those.
Right. Okay. So, Cheryl, how do you view it? I mean, there is a big offensive play here, and we'll go more in depth on Jagmeet Singh a bit later in the hour. But you know, he is being targeted. What do you make of what the Liberals and the Conservatives are doing here?
Yeah, I think what Carney is doing is a little more textbook. Like, you kind of have 2 goals in this last portion of the campaign, which is really to rally your support and get decided voters out to vote. And what you do on tour is demonstrate momentum. Like, you should have bigger and bigger and bigger events and enthusiasm and rallies. And then also, of course, where you stop really tells a story. And it's either that you're in places where you're super, super competitive, typically, or you're in places that you need to shore up, or you're trying to tell a story like we're actually competitive in places you didn't expect us to be. Poilievre's sort of doing the opposite of that. And I get, you know, it's great to check the box and say we've been in Saskatchewan, and it's tough to have not visited Saskatchewan throughout the campaign. But it seems little risk to skipping over Saskatchewan at this point, unless you feel like something's in jeopardy there. So to go to Saskatoon and then stop in Calgary in the only Liberal safe seat in Calgary is kind of, I mean, maybe there's some method to this madness we're not aware of, but it is a little untextbook for the closing days of a campaign.
Yeah, look, the Calgary thing, Fred, just help me understand this as someone who's probably planned more tour on a national scale than the others in this conversation. The images I've seen of that is it's Pierre Poilievre at the airport in front of the plane. So it's like it's kind of a quick stop to be there, right? So it's an image, you get your crowd out, you keep them motivated there. But, you know, the Liberals are looking to gain in Calgary. They think there's 2, 3, 4 seats maybe they're competitive in. Should we draw any conclusions from the fact that Pierre Poilievre is there?
Yeah, well, look, I think he also wants to try to pick up the one Liberal seat that is there. There is a seat there that we could try to take back. So, you know, that is a seat from the Liberals that we could do. But look, it's a whistle stop. It's he popped in, you know, got off the plane, doing a speech, and then getting back on the plane and flying out. It's not a, what else are you doing in the afternoon?
Yeah, there's a lot of stops that are just done for convenience reasons at this time of the campaign. It's not so much the riding, but how close is it to the airport so we can get in and get out quick. Greg, I want to circle back to the Nova Scotia issue that you raised off the top, because throughout this election campaign, there has been some tension between the federal Conservatives, the Ontario Progressive Conservatives, and yesterday, my colleague Kate McKenna reported that this is also the case in Nova Scotia. During last year's provincial election, Tim Houston told reporters that he would not be inviting Pierre Poilievre to campaign with him, drawing a distinct line between the federal and the provincial parties. And Kate is reporting that shortly after that comment, Jenny Byrne, a top advisor to Pierre Poilievre, she's running this campaign, called Houston's team, texted them, telling them that if Poilievre becomes prime minister, they would not lift a finger to help the provincial party. Well, fast forward to the federal election campaign. This week, Pierre Poilievre took his campaign to Nova Scotia for the first time, holding a rally just minutes from Houston's own provincial seat. And the premier did not attend and did not meet with the Conservative leader. But Tim Houston did release this very slick campaign-style video the night before Poilievre landed in the province. Take a look.
Hey, I've sailed on the Blue Nose and do know that you go to Peggy's Cove for the gingerbread, not just the view. I have asked who your father is, and I give directions based on landmarks that are no longer there. My name is Tim, and I am Nova Scotian.
So, Greg, as you can imagine, that got a lot of people wondering what's going on. You know, I don't know if that's a signal of any kind of larger ambitions from Tim Houston, but the revelation of this sort of dysfunction between the federal Conservatives and the Nova Scotia Conservatives on top of everything we've seen in Ontario, how's that playing in your home province?
Well, there's a lot of chatter about this. There has been for some time. Look, I was just in Nova Scotia and I watched that. I don't want to go back. And I hope, like lots of Canadians, visit Nova Scotia this summer instead of going to the United States. But what's really interesting is that Tim Houston just won a huge majority. And in the days after, the weeks after, he had a really tough kind of approach in terms of the legislature, the legislation that he was bringing in. This is more the Tim Houston, I think, that people knew from his first term. But, you know, everything has an agenda in politics, even if you don't mean to have that agenda. But it certainly is, you know, raising Houston's profile quite a bit, which he's been doing a lot with, you know, his efforts with Doug Ford. We know that the Atlantic premiers have been very aggressive on interprovincial trade, Houston being one of them. That being said, as a Nova Scotian who's pretty, you know, likes to talk about politics with my friends on all sides in Nova Scotia, there's been a lot of chatter about the difference or the you know, the break between the federal and the provincial Tories in Nova Scotia. And you know, I've had some things repeated to me, and again, I won't repeat them because it's hearsay, but you know, attributed to, you know, Conservative members of Parliament and their view of the Houston government. I did note something that back in March that I thought, as I was hearing this, is Houston's chief of staff on Twitter retweeted the Mark Carney tweet that had the ad with Mike Myers in it. And that did not go unnoticed in Nova Scotia. That was kind of seen as a bit of a sign or a message about where the Houston government saw things. And a few weeks ago, Tim Houston did make a statement about how things were going. And he did say things that were not unkind to Mark Carney. So it's not a complete surprise, but it's certainly very telling about the approach that the Conservative campaign had. You know, that this these stories of, angry phone calls and emails, I've heard them from conservative friends. We know that, they've been talked about with the Ford government. I guess in 2024, when your polls are really good, you thought you didn't need to maintain or build bridges, and now it's coming back to haunt them.
Cheryl, it's an interesting thing to see all of these things being revealed at this stage in a campaign as the once inevitable and invincible Conservatives seem less inevitable and less invincible, right? That people are speaking more freely about it, talking about it. J.D. Bellavance was on the show last night and talked about how Éric Girard, the finance minister in Quebec, wanted to run for the Conservatives but was rejected by the leadership. I'm here in Toronto. I went to an event the other night where a bunch of Ontario PCs were there, and they talk about how bad the relationship is. These loyalty tests and purity tests that have apparently been applied, they're coming back to haunt you in the stretch run of the campaign in provinces where they had the potential to grow.
Yeah, and you know what? This isn't, it's not new, but also there's another layer in this particular election where it really has been every premier, every party for themselves. And we've seen that all the way from British Columbia to the Atlantic. We've seen, Premier Eby, Captain Canadaing out on his own with no allegiance to any party. He's endorsed the NDP, but he's also done a public event with Mark Carney. Then you've had Danielle Smith willing to sacrifice Canadian unity for whatever bumps her polls in Alberta. We have Doug Ford, who's basically endorsing the Liberals. I don't think it's any surprise that Premier Houston would distance himself given the polling numbers in Nova Scotia right now. And, partisanship aside, I thought the ad was pretty good. Like, if everybody's looking at you, you might as well do something that makes them feel good. And that is like an inside joke. Like, I'm not a Nova Scotia person, but I imagine that if you are, you listen to that and you watch that, and every little thing that he says is like an inside joke to you or an inside piece of information, and it evokes some kind of emotion. And I think that's just really demonstrating leveraging a moment when he has one.
Well, look, Fred, as an Atlantic Canadian, his bit, I give directions based on landmarks that are no longer there, that resonated because, distance is measured in time when you're driving back home. But, Fred, on this, there are two Conservative-run provinces in Canada where the federal Conservatives could gain seats, right? That's Ontario and that's Nova Scotia. And they seem to have no functional relationship with either of the premiers, both of whom are quite successful. What does this do in the stretch run of a campaign and throughout a campaign if you've got these obvious fissures and division and you need these people on your team?
Yeah, look, it's not helpful. It's very, very challenging as a Conservative to win a federal election in Canada at any time, and it is a missed opportunity that relationships weren't formulated between the federal party and the provincial ones where they could. They should be working hand in glove as much as they can, but that is the struggle with conservatism in this country. It is very divided in many ways by region and different outlooks. So it's hard to pull it together. You need the right leadership to do it. And it was missed, and it's something that we're seeing in different provinces, which is quite unfortunate.
Do you think, though, Fred, it's I don't know if it's a purity test or what it is, but the criticism here all the time is Tim Houston doesn't govern like a Conservative, Doug Ford doesn't govern like a Conservative. The lesson to me in that is that, well, they govern, multiple terms successfully. That seems to be what you want to learn from rather than whether they're ideologically pure enough. Yeah,
look, they're the two in the last 6 months that got reelected with massive majorities. One of them, Doug Ford, just won a third straight election with increasing his vote each of those elections. And Tim Houston just won the most seats in the history of Nova Scotia. So these folks clearly know how to campaign and win in their provinces. And having better relations with the provinces, the federal party, always works well. Mr. Harper did that well. I thought, he really reached and did a lot of outreach with the provinces and built those relationships, and it paid off for him. Yeah, and had champions, people like Peter MacKay running in specific areas, people who could sort of carry the standard for you in those regions. Okay, we're going to look at the bigger picture now. We're going to as we head into the last weekend of this campaign, we're going to check in on the current state of the race, and for that we're going to bring in our Eric Grenier. He is back, and he, of course, is the author of the Writ.ca. He also runs the CBC Poll Tracker, which, Eric, I look at about 40 times a day, and based on the traffic I'm seeing, so do tens of thousands and maybe millions of other Canadians. So
Look, when we checked in earlier this week, the top line was the Liberals had about a 5-point lead over the Conservatives nationally. What kind of movement are you seeing in those numbers this week?
We are seeing that the lead that the Liberals had earlier on in the campaign is definitely dissipated. They're still ahead, but the margin is now more about a 3 or 4 point lead. In the poll average on the poll tracker, it takes into account all the polls that are being published in this campaign. The Liberals are still leading. They have 42.3% support in the poll tracker. Conservatives are not too far behind now. They're at 38.6%, so it's not a very big gap. It's definitely a smaller one than we saw just before the debates when the Liberals were 6-7 points ahead. And for the other parties, the New Democrats are still struggling. They're at just under 9%. The Bloc Québécois has seen a little bit of a rebound in Quebec. They're at 6%, and the Greens still not really registering very much at 2%.
Okay, a little bit of a tightening in the top line, but still a Liberal lead, the type that would suggest that they're going to do pretty well. So, I mean, let's look at the seat projections here and what these new numbers tell us about where the parties stand.
Yeah, because of some of the numbers we've seen, particularly in Ontario, Quebec, Atlantic Canada, the Liberals are still favored to win the most seats and potentially majority government. We're currently projecting they would win 190 seats. Take a look at the range there. There's a lot of uncertainty in some of these races, particularly in Quebec, but the lower range for the Liberals is now 165. It used to be entirely above the majority threshold. Now it's a little bit below it. So there is still a scenario we can imagine if all those close races don't go the Liberals' way, that they could come up short. But the Conservatives are well behind at 125 seats, and they top out at 144, which is probably not enough to even form a minority government. Bloc Québécois still doing worse than they had in the last election at 22 seats, but it's between 19 and 26 seats, so we could still see that they get a decent haul. The NDP is at 5, but with a range of 3 to 13, so there's a lot of it's going to depend on the local candidates. And the Greens still at 1, still in contention for the 2 seats they had at dissolution.
Okay, I got a quick question to ask you just about those ranges. Eric, even at the low end of 165 for the Liberals, with the Conservatives at the high end of 144, there's no scenario we see right now with the polling where the Liberals actually finish behind the Conservatives. Is that safe to say, or how should we view it?
Yeah, that is pretty much it. The ranges take into account all the normal kind of errors you see.
Right.
We do have a wider range, which is if the polls are pretty much just very wrong. In that scenario, you do have the potential for the Conservatives to be ahead, but it would take something that would be pretty unprecedented.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so those are the top line numbers. The key thing, though, here is the regional numbers, right? So, because vote inefficiency and vote efficiency really matter. So let's look at how the parties are doing some of the battlegrounds. Let's start with Quebec, where the Liberals are far ahead, but the race between the Bloc and the Conservatives for second has been tight. So where do things stand now in Quebec?
Yeah, in Quebec, we still have the Liberals leading, but they have now dropped below 40%. Earlier on in the campaign, they were quite a bit above that threshold. So they have a lead of about 14 points over the Bloc Québécois. So they are in a good position to pick up a lot of seats from the Bloc. The two parties were more or less tied in Quebec in the 2021 election. Conservatives, though, are up pretty big in Quebec. 25% would be more than what Stephen Harper managed in that 2006 breakthrough. So the Conservatives could be actually taking some seats away from the Bloc. The NDP at 6%, still struggling in the province. But it's this gap between the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois. It used to be 20 points. Now it's at 14 points. That does make a difference in a lot of seats.
Okay, just before we leave Quebec, so Eric, you know, the Liberals I speak with, they say if the number starts with a 4, if they get over 40, that's kind of where they need to be. You know, if they're on the path to a majority, they're just below 40%. Do they still maybe get over 40 seats, or is it in doubt?
Right now, we're projecting that they would win about 40 seats. So it seems to be in line with what the
right there
are telling you.
Okay, all right. Mark Carney, he left Quebec a couple of days ago. He's campaigning in Ontario today, where there are 122 seats up for grabs. Earlier in the week, Liberals had an 11-point lead there. How are the parties doing now in Canada's biggest province?
Yeah, the Liberals still have a lead in Ontario, but it isn't as big as it was before. So currently we have them leading with 47.4%. The Conservatives are just under 40%. So now we're looking at a gap that's more 7 or 8 points between the Liberals and the Conservatives, which is still a pretty big gap. And if you put that gap up against the kind of margins that Justin Trudeau had when he won 78, 80 seats in elections in Ontario, this is a good result for the Liberals. The NDP at 8% still struggling, and again, it really will come down to just their incumbents and whether they can survive. 8% for the NDP in Ontario, you should see most of them get wiped out. Maybe they have some local appeal that is going to save some of them.
Yeah, they got those 3 incumbents in southwestern Ontario that they need to hold on. Okay, Pierre Poilievre spending his last Friday on the campaign in Western Canada, be at events in British Columbia this evening. Where does that race currently stand in BC? Because that's a key one for the Conservatives here.
It is, and it is still one of the most fascinating provinces we've seen throughout this election. We do still have the Liberals leading in British Columbia on average with 42% support. The Conservatives are not very far behind. It's 39% they have, so that's about a 3-point gap in BC. It had been 5-6 points not too long ago. The NDP at 13%. Their numbers have come up a little bit, but still, more than half of their vote has gone away. And the Greens at 4% in BC. They usually do a lot better than that. Again, it is going to come down to, for both the New Democrats and the Greens, the name on the ballot, not the color of the party, because the color of the party is not helping out those candidates right now.
Vancouver Island is the most fascinating little micro-region in the entire country. Like all 4 colors you see on the board, skin in the game there. So Eric, what else are you watching for in the last weekend of the campaign?
Well, we are going to get that final rush of polls. The polling front got a little quiet the last few days as the pollsters are doing their last checks. So I'm going to look to see if we do see any last-minute movement. That is when we sometimes get a signal if there is going to be a surprise on Election Day. So just to see if any of those numbers are going to shift. But for people watching at home, they see lots of those polls coming out. You got to look at the Ontario numbers especially, because a lot of the national numbers we've seen, the margin has been getting tighter, but the Liberal lead in Ontario is still big enough that they should win, at the very least, 80 seats in Ontario if those numbers hold up.
Yeah, and Eric, just to explain to people why Ontario matters so much, it's 122 seats.
Big province.
It's Newfoundland and Labrador, PEI, the 3 territories, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, and BC combined. Right? That's why Ontario decides elections, right?
Yeah, and that's usually how Ontarians think of themselves, as just an accumulation of all those different provinces. But definitely, that's the ball game for the Liberals and for the Conservatives.
Yeah. That is a larger conversation that we're not going to have right now. But Eric, thank you so much. That's the RIT.ca's Eric Grenier. We're going to check back in with Eric on Tuesday, the day after the election, as we pick over the numbers. Okay, we're going to go back to Fred and Greg and Cheryl. Cheryl, what do you make of those numbers, in particular the way BC is looking there? I find it fascinating because I think the Liberals got 3rd in vote share in BC in the last election, but like 2nd in seats, right? Because
most
of incredible most in seats. And Cheryl, here they are like at 42%. They've never seen numbers like that in BC in a long, long time. What do you make of what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen BC vote so volatile, not just through this federal election, but through the provincial election as well. Like we saw the Conservatives sitting ahead throughout the campaign provincially. You saw those numbers tied, and then eventually have David Eby come out just barely with a win. And in this election as well, a lot of people who had voted Conservative or New Democrat in the past have flocked to the Liberals as likely a stable choice. But a lot of volatility, and like you say, a lot of volatility on the island, where the NDP has been making a really specific push. And if you're out there and you see the lawn signs, the signs say only New Democrats, stop Conservatives, which I think Vancouver Island is the only place they're putting those signs up. But that seems to be resonating because the NDP vote is actually stronger in British Columbia than it is across the country. So, as you said, really, really interesting place to watch. And certainly, BC wrestles with some really difficult decisions, economy versus environment. And so not surprising to see the vote shake out this way.
So, Greg, when you look at those BC regional numbers, the Ontario numbers, and the Quebec numbers, how smugly overconfident are you as the Liberal in the room right now?
you know how I hate predictions, and I hate to fly too close to the sun. And 2 weeks ago, you made us walk through our predictions, and I just, kind of tensed all weekend for somebody to accuse me of drape measuring. But, when Eric was talking about Ontario, as the resident dinosaur on the panel today, I remember in '93 when, the Cochrane election, and when the numbers, started coming in for Ontario, Cochrane was just running the board. So, one of my, second, I guess, earliest federal election, and, really hits home what the impact of Ontario plus Quebec can be for the Liberal Party. So I think, I'm not unhappy that the Conservative leader is doing rallies this weekend, because it sends a message to Liberals that you need to get out there and continue to work until, the polls close. But also, I am mindful that when you do a rally, all those rallies that the Conservatives are doing, they are taking volunteers away from other things as well. So I think the lesson, for Liberals is to not listen to what you just described, how you describe me. Don't be smug, and just floor it, gas pedal all the way.
Well, yeah, Fred, I tried to walk Greg into jinxing his party, but he didn't take the bait. So there you go. But look, Fred, when you look at numbers like that and you look at the time that's left, I mean, there has been some tightening, but it's like 1 or 2 points really at the top line. It's not been the big kind of move I think the Conservatives were hoping for. So, I mean, what is your sense of how it looks now and how much it could realistically change in the time that's left?
Yeah, look, in 21, we were leading in terms of seat count. We believed in our tracking on the Thursday, and by the Monday, that had fallen. So those 3 days did matter. So something could happen if if they somehow catch fire with their message over the next 3 days and where they're going. The numbers that are jumping out at me, though, like in Ontario, last election, Liberals beat us by 4 points. And they got 78 seats, and now they're beating us by 8 points. I don't know, like 80 is the number Grenier gave. That seems like it could be quite low. Quebec is another one. The Bloc, expected to win around 22 seats. They've never actually gotten in that range before. They're always way above 30 or under 10. So that's a wave province where things shift drastically. So I think the Bloc will either come back and win a lot of seats or will go much lower than 22. And of course, those unfortunately will likely go to the Liberals. There's a couple of seats Conservatives can pick up there, the Beauport region, maybe Trois-Rivières, but it's a tough place for us to grow.
Okay, one of the interesting things we've seen are the ads from the Conservatives in the stretch run. Mostly targeted at older voters and older men. There's the golfing ad, there's the Stephen Harper direct appeal, there's a new one out. Let's take a look at the most recent ad the Conservatives are running.
I see people in grocery stores picking up products, looking at the price, putting them back.
The Liberals get back in, oh my gosh, I just signed my pension check over to the Liberal government. They'll have it all before I even get it.
One of my children left Canada for better employment opportunities.
Okay, there's a trend there, Cheryl, in who's in that ad. Older, white, and that maybe tells us who the Conservatives feel they need to get in the time that they have left. What do you make of that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's really telling. They're spending, I think we called it a really defensive campaign earlier today. They're spending their last days in places where they should have safe seats with ads targeting voters who should be a safe demographic. Like we saw white upper class male golfers. If the Conservatives don't have white upper class male golfers, I don't know who they have. And in this ad, like, yes, I imagine that this rings really true for the people watching the ad, but I also would think that the people who found themselves in this demographic would already be Conservative supporters. So I know I've said from the beginning, I am surprised by the Conservatives' ad strategy, always impressed by the ability for them to reach people online, but I do question the content, and I think it is really telling about their strategy in these final days.
Fred, what does that tell us? I mean, the golf ad, was obviously targeting men in this cohort, and now there's some women in this one, but it's very much a baby boomer play, because what I hear from candidates is that if it's a woman in particular over the age of 50, they're not getting a good response at the door.
Right, so I wouldn't say this is a defensive play. This is actually an offensive play, trying to get that voter demographic back. We haven't had it since, we've lost it in 2015 and have never had it since then. That's 3 elections in a row where the Liberals have defeated us in a demographic that used to be very solid Conservative, and it isn't anymore. I do find it, a bit unfortunate that 3 days before Election Day, we're now putting out more aggressive ads, trying to win that over. We've had 2 years to do something on this, and we haven't. But that's one of the things we got to take away from this as Conservatives. We got to get better at figuring out the demographics we need to win and going after them much sooner than a few days before E-Day.
Greg, what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think what's interesting is who's not in the ad. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, is not in those ads. Last Friday, in our last round, I had brought up the one with the 2 older male golfers, and we've since seen what I believe is the ad for the union, for the casting call, and they asked for white male non-union players, I guess. On a different note, I feel sorry for the children of these people that are in the ads, because apparently their kids have really messed up, and the parents who, I'm trying to figure out the age range here. Like, maybe you had kids, really, really late into life, but why are you still, trying to protect your kids? Is kind of a joke I've heard a lot of people make. So much for the pull up your bootstraps.
Right.
whether or not this is a demographic that the Conservatives have lost, it's a demographic that I think stereotypically we believe that votes Conservative. And I don't ever remember in the last couple of elections the Conservatives needing to narrowcast or micro-target a demographic like this. And I think that's kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, well, Cheryl, one of the interesting transformations of who is supporting the Conservatives right now under Mr. Poilievre is that he has made it much younger, right? He's reached a lot of younger voters who have moved to him because of the issues around generational fairness and structural barriers to them having the lives that the golfers in that ad were able to have. But, you know, this is now 3 ads in the stretch run that does not feature Pierre Poilievre. And it's such a fascinating contrast with the actual campaign itself, like the tour, because it's all about the leader, but then the bot media is not about the leader. So there's no narrative amplification. There's a contrast kind of happening there.
Yeah, and I think it's 2 different groups of people. Like the people who love Pierre Poilievre enough to turn out at his rallies love Pierre Poilievre. Like there's no question about that. They're there for his energy, for his rhymes, for the idea of being in the room with a whole bunch of people who feel the same way. When they're talking about persuadable voters, which is who they need if they want to win in this election, if you look at Pierre's favorability throughout this campaign, his negatives have been so much higher than his positives across the board. When you know, pollsters have asked people, how have your feelings changed about this leader over the last weeks? Mark Carney gets a net positive and Pierre Poilievre gets a net negative. And if you're a campaign looking at how to feature someone in your final ad, you're going to feature your party, not your leader, if your party's polling higher than your leader. And that's the case here.
Right. So Fred, I mean, we've talked about narrative a lot on this show since we started doing this Friday segment. I mean, when the ad is very different than the tour, is that a narrative problem, or is it good to broaden your narrative appeal? I mean, how do you view it as someone who ran a campaign?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of an issue with the narrative. It's a bit, you know, they are trying to bring it back to affordability, and that's the issue. And that's what they're trying to get a group that maybe they're feeling isn't hit by affordability at the same level to understand that a lot of people are struggling, can't afford a home, and reach that demographic that it is important for the future of this country to vote Conservative to deal with these issues.
Okay, I have one last question for you, Fred. I want to go back to what you're saying about the end of the 2021 campaign. Just, you thought the model had you ahead in seat counts, because Aaron O'Toole, you did win the popular vote over Justin Trudeau in 2021. But this was an election with COVID at the tail end, and there was a COVID outbreak in Alberta. Things got pretty bad for former Premier Jason Kenney back then. Is that what did you in? Like, is it that kind of an externality that's required at this stage to flip things, or could it feels like an ad campaign is not going to do it now with everyone watching hockey and 25% of the electorate having already voted. Does it take something like that to move it now?
Likely, yes, and that's what did it. It was COVID was spiking that last week, and then on Thursday night before the election, Jason Kenney announced a lockdown in Alberta, which just sent shockwaves across the country, and our tracking. If the election was the Monday previous, Aaron O'Toole would have won that election and been Prime Minister. But the way it was going, if the election was a week after what it was, Trudeau would have got a majority. So it was moving, it was volatile, and it would take something big probably to move where we're going right now.
Okay, we're going to take a look. Quickly, Cheryl, go ahead.
Can I tell you something? I was just going to tell you a really fun story about polls moving dramatically in the last final days of a campaign. When I ran Saskatchewan last year, all the polls shifted 2 nights before the election. And if you watched really closely, they predicted a majority NDP government in Saskatchewan coming the next day. And as we said today, we do not have a majority NDP government in Saskatchewan. So sometimes those massive moves in the final days are not actually accurate.
Well, that's a good point to remember. But Carla Beck did make big gains, especially in the urban centers of Saskatchewan, right? So there was movement, and maybe it just got overstated. Who knows? This is why we do the poll tracker. We want to smooth out any anomalies. All right, we're going to take a look at the other 2 national parties, or federal parties, excuse me, because the Bloc is not national. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, he's back in battleground Ontario, where the NDP currently holds 5 seats. And with just 3 days to go before Election Day, Singh started out with a stump speech in Toronto. He then hopped down to Hamilton, where he visited a mosque, and later a campaign office to meet with volunteers. Singh will end the day in London, where he plans to meet with local supporters at a brewery. This morning in Toronto, he was asked about this Toronto Star article where Singh defended not forcing an election last fall when the polling was much different.
At the time, I could not stomach the idea of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives forming a majority government. I knew that was going to be bad. I knew that was going to be bad because of their cuts, because of their division, because of the things they wanted, and I did not want to let that happen.
The NDP is currently polling at just under 8% in Ontario, according to the CBC's poll tracker. The CBC's Marina von Stackelberg is following Jagmeet Singh's campaign this week. Marina.
Hey, David, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he stands behind his decision to not trigger a federal election sooner. The New Democrats supported the Liberal minority government for more than 2 years in return for key social programs. Last fall, Singh ripped up the deal, but despite threats, the NDP never brought down the Liberal government. As you heard there, Singh says he couldn't stomach the idea of a Pierre Poilievre majority government, and he didn't want to be part of paving the path for that. The NDP leader says he was also trying to buy more time, so Canadians actually started to receive the dental and pharmacare programs the NDP had fought for. He felt if some people were getting those benefits by the time an election was called, it would make it harder for any future government to take them away. But his decision to keep the Liberals afloat has followed him in this campaign, with Conservatives and some Progressives arguing he sold out the New Democrats. And while Singh is dogged by his ties to Trudeau, the Liberals under new leader Mark Carney are pulling support from the left. All week, Carney has hit ridings right after Singh's team leaves. Both leaders will be in London, Ontario tonight as the New Democrats make their final push for votes in southwestern Ontario, hitting all 3 seats they hold right now and want to keep. David?
All right, Marina, thank you very much. That's the CBC's Marina von Stackelberg. A correction there. I said they were below 8%. They're just above 8%, 8.3% in the poll tracker. Sorry, New Democrats, I did not mean to shortchange you. All right, like the NDP, Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet is also fighting for the balance of power in Parliament. Blanchet is once again campaigning in the areas surrounding Montreal, making multiple stops. He's urging Quebecers to vote for him to protect Quebec's values.
We are, either we like it or not, part of an artificial country with very little meaning called Canada. Many people in Canada write to me and say, we'd like to have the same as Quebec has.
Blanchet got a boost today from one of the province's political parties. The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian is traveling with the Bloc campaign. Rafi.
David, I'm in Victoriaville between Montreal and Quebec City in one of the rare Quebec ridings that voted for the Conservatives in 2021. Now, the outgoing MP, Alain Reyes, quit Conservative caucus and then said he's not running again. And that gives the Bloc Québécois some hope here. Leader Yves-François Blanchet also got some last-minute assistance when late yesterday, the provincial Parti Québécois leader, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, published a letter endorsing Blanchet and really tearing into the Liberals, calling their leader, Mark Carney, an existential threat to Quebec, also saying the Liberals have ruined immigration in Quebec and attacking them for their challenge of 2 different pieces of Quebec legislation, the controversial secularism and language protection laws in court. Plamondon is a popular figure here. If there was a provincial election today, polls say he would win a majority of the seats. That's far from the fate they reserve for Blanchet, who has a long road trip ahead of him tomorrow, going to Val d'Or in Quebec's north, where he's hoping to fend off a Liberal newcomer and protect a Bloc seat. That's his challenge in much of this campaign across the province. David?
Thank you, Rafi. That's the CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian in Victoriaville, Quebec. Okay, let's bring back Cheryl, Fred, and Greg on this. Cheryl, Jagmeet Singh going through NDP-held seats in southwestern Ontario, and Mark Carney, the big red bus, following right behind him. What does that tell you about what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, this has been the story of the NDP throughout this campaign. We've always known that it had to be super targeted and a very surgical campaign. And we saw the NDP go rally people in British Columbia as they make their way back. You know, they're hoping to hold seats on the island, on the mainland, lower mainland in British Columbia, and a few across the prairies, but they need those seats in southwestern Ontario if they want to maintain party status. So I don't think it's surprising to anyone to see them go rally the troops, go remind people what the NDP stands for, and go deliver not a nuanced message, but a very clear message. We're not fighting for government here. We're fighting to be what Jagmeet has really set up as the conscience of Canada.
Greg, you know, I don't want to be too grim and negative on the NDP. You know, friends of the show, Leah Ward and Mel Richer, you know, who's a big part of this Friday group. They've gone to work on that campaign to try to get them over that 12-seat mark. What do you make of what you're seeing from the NDP nationally and whether they are going to hold on to that official party status? Because it looks like a tough fight right now.
It's funny, Cheryl just mentioned that they needed to be surgical and targeted, except, if you look at the campaign, they weren't. Their advertising has changed dramatically. They look great, but the messages, to me, never really resonated to what the NDP could be promoting, as what they did, dental care. They took a long time to get around to that. Last night, the chief of staff to the NDP leader tweeted that Mark Carney was targeting, held New Democratic seats. Well, I'd like to welcome them to the election portion of the campaign.
Works, yeah.
And that's how it works.
Yeah.
And if, and to me, that just seemed kind of indicative of a lot of the challenges that we've talked about with Singh. That, the guy that you meet is so sincere and authentic and real, and the person on TV or behind a podium you don't get that sense of it. But, the interview in the Toronto Star, it does have the feeling of an exit interview, sadly. And I think, when this is over and done, if you've got the tone that the NDP leader, the Bloc leader are giving right now, it does sound like they are in a lot of ways conceding or admitting to what they're going to have. And then, how many leadership races are we going to see 2025, 2026, down the road?
Fred, that interview with the Toronto Star, essentially, I did it for Canada. I held on to stop Pierre Poilievre from becoming Prime Minister and getting a majority, even though maybe they could have benefited and become the opposition. Does that resonate with voters, or does that annoy your loyalists? I'm not sure how that plays, like the people you're asking to stay with you at this stage of the campaign.
Yeah, and what was all the theatrics of him ripping up the SACA agreement end of summer last year, if he was going to keep them alive through the whole fall with no actual repercussions? The whole thing is strange. His strategy is strange. I wonder, if I was running the NDP campaign, I don't know if I'd be sending him to NDP seats to try to hold. I think I'd be sending him somewhere else, because I think they're better served with their strong MPs knocking on doors trying to get their voters that way, because I don't think he brings a lot to the table. The state of the NDP right now, Mark Carney somehow has scrubbed himself from Justin Trudeau while Jagmeet Singh is wearing that albatross around his neck. The United Kingdom about 10, 15 years ago had a similar thing to Osaka. They had a coalition government, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, and that ended up in the next election basically wiping out the Liberal Democratic Party in the UK. And I think that's what we're seeing here. So it's a good cautionary tale in the Canadian political system. Be careful when you sign on with another party.
Yeah, and that was sort of the analysis at the time. And Cheryl, Fred is right when he says that Mark Carney's kind of scrubbed himself out. At times, he successfully prosecuted the record of the government he now leads. But I wonder what's your sense of how New Democrats and who are being asked to stick with him to the bitter end react to a headline like the one in the Toronto Star today?
I think they are okay with it. I listen to you all talk. And I get that the messages don't resonate with you. And I get that, that for the Liberal and the Conservative on the panel, that hearing this message, you're like, I don't get it, because you're not a New Democrat. And New Democrats, you guys are all going to roll your eyes at me. But New Democrats are okay with sacrificing party success over the future of the country. And what Jagmeet is saying in this article is that, I wanted to make sure dental care was in place. I wanted to make sure pharmacare was in place. I wanted to do all of that, and I didn't want Pierre Poilievre to be able to undo it. And so I was okay with losing seats in order to see that through. And as a New Democrat, those things are really important to me. I'm okay with having fewer seats because he did that. And so I think that message speaks directly to New Democrats, and I totally understand why parties that, maybe that's not at the core of your value system, it doesn't resonate with them.
David,
go ahead, Greg. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't actually think it was a bad message. I just think it's a few weeks too late. And I would also say that I hear what Cheryl's saying, but if there has not been consistency in the NDP message, this is about the third main message. They went off from being like, I'm running to be Prime Minister, and that got kind of thrown off to the side at some point. And at that point, they always seem to be scrambling. I think, his explanation today, I think is not a bad one. I just think it's the right message, but it's weeks too late.
If I may, I think it was a week too early. I think this is a message after you guys get crushed. You say, this is why we did this. You don't come out now and say, hey, I wanted to stop Poilievre from winning, because now you're telling every NDP voter in the country, if you want to stop Poilievre from winning, you have to go Liberal. I think that's a big strategic mistake.
I do agree with that. I do think it would have been really hard to come out of the gates with this message. Like, it's hard to run in a federal campaign unless you're at the Bloc and not say, I'm running to be prime minister. That is a weird way to enter a campaign. So I do think this is a message they had to kind of follow the narrative to get to. But I do take the point that, it does sort of give permission to those voters across the country who are considering giving up the New Democrat vote.
So Cheryl, on that, I mean, it started with I'm running to be prime minister, then it was I'm running to hold the balance of power in a minority, and then it was you need to elect as many New Democrats as possible to hold Mark Carney to progressive values. And now sort of this, in the way you've explained how you read the Star article, is that Jagmeet Singh essentially, as a leader, will be consequential even if he's not electorally successful because of the programs that were implemented. And are New Democrats okay with that if they lose official party status? Do you think? Does it broaden even to that level of a bad outcome on Monday, potentially?
I think nobody wants to see the party sink below official party status. But if in the end we are at a point where we have, moved forward on dental care, moved forward on pharmacare, purely because of the work and the efforts of the NDP, that's a win for the NDP. Yes, everyone would love the party to maintain party status, but if it doesn't, like I've said before, New Democrats are super, super stubborn, and they're all going to rally behind and rebuild the party. So it would be nice to have the best of all worlds, but I do think that New Democrats will read this message and be okay with sacrificing a little bit of party power for the future of the country.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. Okay, I want to show something else because, we've talked about the fight between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and the Bloc and the NDP got into it today. The two leaders, they were on the campaign trails, and the two leaders are fighting for the balance of power, fighting for a relevant position in Parliament, and they're taking shots at each other. Take a listen to this.
Sadly, the Bloc is basically a useless party. They had the past 3 years of a minority government and literally did this much for people. Nothing. They can point to nothing that they achieved in a minority government where they had the balance of power. They couldn't negotiate anything. They couldn't force anything. They got nothing done for you and your families.
If having been in the opposition or being in the opposition is being useless, the NDP has never had any kind of use. At least the Bloc Québécois is the proud representative of a proud nation. In a few days from now, I might tell myself, I won't miss this guy.
Okay, Cheryl, I obviously you do not agree with Mr. Blanchette that they have been a useless party. You're looking at the policy achievements in the last Parliament, but why are Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet scrapping in the stretch run? Help me understand this.
I can't. I don't know. It does seem like a little misguided. Maybe a little bit misdirected. People's feelings are going in all directions these days, but they're sort of like the jockeying to be who is the most relevant, irrelevant party in the next Parliament. So that is a crown worth wearing this time around. And I mean, both parties have sort of come up with the same message, which is, we're not going to be the official opposition. We're not going to be government, but you need us in Parliament because you need us to hold, the party in power accountable. I get that it's hard for both parties to say that at the same time. So I do think it's sort of trying to push the other party out and say, we are the party that's going to take that role. But I do think these words, this effort, this energy could be better spent on different targets.
Yeah, like Greg, you look at the map and we're talking about, Alexandre Boularice's riding and, Berthier-Masconanger, where Ruth Ellen Brosseau is trying to make a comeback. There's no block fight on Vancouver Island or the lower mainland of BC. So, what do you make of this particular side drama to the central campaigns?
I don't know. I just think of, it's the squirrel. I don't know if it's some sort of like distraction ploy or just show that you still have some fire left in your belly. I don't know, but I can't help hearing in both what the Bloc leader has said there and some other things and what Singh is saying is there's a note of finality. I know we're getting to the end of the campaign, but it does feel like there's something else there. And I do think that they are, scratching for what their legacy of this Parliament will be. And, to be fair to Mr. Singh, dental care is a pretty significant legacy. It's been a while since if you put me on the spot right now, I'd be looking at some things that, Bloc members might have done on the Foreign Affairs Committee or the Status of Women Committee, but I would be going Parliaments back. So in some ways, perhaps Mr. Singh just thought he had an opportunity for a good zinger and perhaps some earned media.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Freddie's tried to do that contrast point that, you know, those guys having the balance of power won't get you anything. Us having the balance of power get you something, right? But because, you know, the Bloc tried to get OAS increase, they tried to get supply management protection and mixed results there as opposed to the clear successes. But, you know, the Bloc are in a fight with the Liberals, really, for dominance in Quebec seats. This seems, maybe they just don't like each other. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, look, when Jagmeet Singh was first leader of the NDP, he had about 20 Quebec members of parliament in his caucus, and he lost almost all of them. So I don't know if he's still wired to try to have that fight and try to win those seats back. A lot of them went to the Bloc. So maybe there's a history there in that regard. But or at the same time, when you're fighting for 6 seats total in the country, you know, 1 or 2 in Quebec, that could be a 30-year caucus.
Right. So, Cheryl, I mean, I don't know if Ruth Ellen Brousseau is going to get it done. Certainly, she's a big name who turned into quite an effective member of Parliament, despite the flukish nature of her entry into politics in the Orange Wave victory. And Mr. Boularice, by all accounts, seems reasonably safe at this point, which is not something you can say about a lot of the New Democrat incumbents. But outside of that, I mean, this is an English Canada play. It has to be, right, for Jagmeet Singh to say we can get stuff done unlike the other irrelevant party, to use your phrase?
Yeah, I don't mean that. I take it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think the NDP, just as has been said, if you are trying to hold on to party status and you have a small number of incumbents to do that work, every single seat matters. So Jagmeet Singh making a play for Quebec, saying, what have they got you? And look at what we've got you, look at what we've got Canada. Obviously positioning himself to say, if you want someone to fight for you and you don't think it's these two parties, we're saying that it's us. And the only way that he can do that is by pushing the Bloc out.
Okay, look, in the time we got left, I kind of want to just look ahead to Monday and what you're watching for. Like, Greg, we are in the final 72 hours or so of an election campaign that, you know, when we all said goodbye for the Christmas holidays, is not the election campaign we expected, right? Like, things really started to change on the 6th of January at around 11 o'clock in the morning. So what are you watching for in the time that's left and when the early results are coming in on Monday? Greg?
I am struck by the difference in the conservative approach right now. We're seeing ads that are leaving the conservative leader out. Lisa Raitt, former cabinet minister, was quoted this week as saying, you know, they're hearing on the doorsteps that the leader is a bit of the issue. And then we see the visuals from the rally in Calgary today, where Poilievre is standing in front of a plane with his own big name on it, similar to a politician from the United States. The whole visuals of that airport rally, I looked at that and I thought, this really reminds me of a Trump rally. And for a campaign that has struggled to define itself, you know, through Donald Trump and away from Donald Trump, it was a really, really strange choice, I guess. So I'm really interested to watch where the Conservative campaign goes this weekend. The other thing is, you know, people, please watch the stupid tricks. They're not going to matter at this point, I don't think. Just don't do something stupid that's going to be career impacting.
Like make buttons? Yeah.
Like make buttons, yes, exactly, Fred. None of those at this stage of the campaign. Fred, what are you kind of watching for? Like, you know, Pierre Poilievre, we think, is going to Peterborough. He's going to be back in his riding. But, I mean, what are you looking for the next couple of days and really when the numbers start to gush in on Monday?
Yeah, well, what I'm looking for is the conversations I'm having is with the ground game and what's happening around the country, where it counts right now. 61 or 62% of Canadians voted in the last election. Projections now have it maybe into the 70s. That's still 30% of Canadians that aren't voting. So whatever campaign can get that bulk of people fired up and out to vote can win this thing. Like, things can turn. Ground game matters. I know the Conservatives have been very, very aggressive on voter ID, and they have, you know, a very good get out the vote system. And if they can get that enthused vote, they have a younger vote that they've never had before. No election I've ever worked on have we led in that demographic. I don't know how to get them out. I hope they figured it out, the people that are running the campaign this time. And then we see what happens. In terms of the results, when watching what comes in, obviously there's key seats we know to watch in Atlantic Canada when the polls close early there to keep an eye on. Cape Breton, Canso, Antigonish, South Shore, St. Margaret's, of course, Terra Nova in Newfoundland. Different ridings that I think may tell us where we're going.
Yeah, and Fred, just on that youth vote, I mean, in political science terms, that's what you call a low propensity voter, right?
Hardest to get out.
Hardest to get out, but that's who Pierre Poilievre is connected with, right?
Yes.
So that could be the thing that surprises. Yes,
yeah.
And that could be the thing that surprises maybe on Monday, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Cheryl, what about you? What do you watch for in the final days and on Monday?
Listen, I know all you Ontario-based people are not caring about Western Canada and that the vote could likely be decided before we get to Alberta, but I am so interested in watching Alberta, where through this campaign, the Liberals have sat higher than they have in many election cycles. The New Democrats are poised to hold on to seats. Many seats are in play in my home city in Calgary that haven't been in play in years. So just thinking about what progressive seats could be picked up in Alberta throughout this campaign, I'm really, really interested in, as I think that kind of sets the tone for the dynamics between Alberta and the rest of the country going forward.
Now, Cheryl, you're on a panel with a Newfoundlander and 2 Nova Scotians, and you're calling us Central Canadian.
I said based. I said based. Ontario based.
But quick, Cheryl, I wonder what your sense is, right? Because you look at Edmonton, right? Blake Desjardins and Heather McPherson are there. Randy Boissonneau's seat is there. Amarjeet Sohi is running, but that's a real strong New Democrat area provincially. More mixed results federally, and the Liberals think they can bust through there. I mean, what's your sense of how that city could go on Monday?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of seats that are toss-ups right now in Edmonton.
Yeah.
I think there is no safe seat for the Conservatives right now in Edmonton, which is really interesting. And then I think, there are safe seats for the Conservatives in Calgary, but there are certainly seats in Calgary that have been long held by the Conservatives that could go Liberal, like Calgary Centre and Calgary Confederation. And then McKnight, I think, is a safe Liberal seat, but it's been split now since the last election. And so the other half of that seat is also in play. So there could be more progressive seats in Alberta than there has been in multiple election cycles, and that would be a really big shift. Right. For the province.
No, I want to say to Cheryl here that just how much I care about Western Canadian, because I'm worried about. I'm interested in Calgary, McKnight, Skyview, Centre, and maybe Confederation. What's going to happen in Desnethe in northern Saskatchewan, what's going to happen in Churchill in Manitoba, and then Kildonan, St. Paul, Winnipeg West, Winnipeg Centre. There's a lot of suddenly things at play in Western Canada where it's Conservative, Liberal, and New Democrat, right? So this is like party status and majority. It's the prairies in BC if the Liberals don't get the big number in Quebec they need, right?
Yeah, that is true. Thank you. I'm just kidding. I know you guys all care about Western Canada. But thank you for saying that.
It's a good point. You make a good point. Because BC is always the empty net goal on Canadian election nights, and that's not a good thing, right, for people out there. So, it's good that you brought it up. Greg, what regions are you worried about and watching? Is there something does the 905 hold and Toronto holds and Quebec, you break off the island and get to the North Shore and the South Shore? Is that kind of, you see that and you go to bed reasonably happy?
I mean, if you're looking at what is going to aid a Liberal government over the next, 4 years, if I'm saying 4 years, it's a majority government. So where does that come from? All that play that they've done, the Liberals have put a lot of effort into Southwest Ontario, absolutely. But I just want to respond, as I think a lot of Liberals worry that provincial parties, especially in the West, provincial Liberal parties are gone. And so if you really want to be a national party, you really need to have, you can't have a province like Saskatchewan not represented by Liberals. So I'm watching very carefully. I told you 2 weeks ago that I thought there was 1 to 2 seats in play. That may be as many as 3 now. And, Cheryl's just done a really good job of talking about the progressive vote increasing in Alberta, and does that mean more Liberal representation in the West? I mean, that is not a bad thing when we have, we've heard a lot about the auto sector. We've heard some about, softwood lumber. We've not heard enough about the potential impacts to canola, for example. So that might be a big fight that's coming up. And it might be better if, Saskatchewan had some representation, if indeed, Carney's party is elected.
Yeah, I think the Liberals' best hopes in Saskatchewan is probably Buckley Boulanger up in Desnethe because of the redrawing of that, and Gary Vidal, the Conservative incumbent, not running in this election. Fred, this may bring it back to Ontario, and I'm not trying to trigger Cheryl with it, but what's the big area you're watching for on Monday? Because the score gets run up in Alberta and Saskatchewan and rural Manitoba stuff. Is it the 905? Is it Southwestern Ontario that really is ball game for you guys?
100%. That's where the growth, the only path to majority. for any party is the 905, the ring around Toronto. We need to make major breakthroughs there right now. We've grown a few in the last election, percentage points, but we need that breakthrough. And when we do, a lot of seats could come if it goes that way.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for being with us throughout the campaign, Cheryl. I know you've been on multiple times this week. Fred, you as well. So thank you all. Enjoy the last weekend of the campaign. Cheryl Oates, Greg McEachern, and Fred Delory. All right, there's still lots more to come here on Power and Politics. Just ahead, what's at stake for the parties and their leaders in the final days of this campaign. Our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, she's going to be here. Then we're going to talk to one of the lawyers leading a case against Donald Trump's tariffs in the United States. And we'll recap the key moments from week 5 on the campaign trail with our weekly wrap.
I'm asking for your vote to stand up to Donald Trump, to build a united Canada, to build Canada strong.
Change so that we can sell our goods to the rest of the world, stand on our own 2 feet, and be a sovereign, self-reliant country.
A voice of moral clarity, a voice of justice, a voice of peace. We used to promote these things at the world stage, and people look to Canada for leadership. And I think we've lost that leadership. We've lost that moral clarity. And I want to bring that back.
If the questions I have raised during the campaign, which is not over, have helped Canadians to think and consider different options before making their decision, then I might have been useful for Canada.
With just 3 days left in the election campaign, party leaders are spreading across the country in a final push to win the support of whatever undecided voters are left in this country. Here to discuss what's at stake for each of the leaders on Monday, we have the CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton. Rosie, good to see you.
Thanks for having me in Adrian's studio.
we keep showing up in the weirdest places. You know, the clips we just heard there from the leaders, Poilievre is change. Carney is kind of Trump, and Singh and Blanchet are please. I mean, this is where we are in the end game. What's your sense of how this election is closing out?
Yeah, I have to say today what struck me was the mudslinging between the Bloc leader and the NDP leader. Like, it's so unusual to see that, like largely pointless in terms of why you would go after each other, but informative because I think it tells you where we're at. And that is at a place where, particularly for the two of them, no matter what they did through this campaign, they just could not punch into the psyche of voters. That's not to say people aren't voting for them. People are voting for them. But because of the way that this has been such a binary kind of race, because of all the reasons we've talked about, just extraordinary, I thought, to see them both, to your point, plead for support. In almost kind of a desperate way, and taking pot shots at one another, even though they both may end up in deep trouble, and certainly aren't taking support from one another. Like, that's the other part that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think that they have now resorted to their arguments of, you know, for the Bloc leader, if there is anything here, if there's anything you're worried about for Quebec, and him admitting, in his view, that Mr. Carney will form the government, then it is safe to return there.
Right.
And for Jagmeet Singh in his final days, frankly, to make an argument that he probably should have started with, and that is, if you want progressive policies, we can help you. And we also think the race is over. That's also extraordinary for two opposition leaders to come to a conclusion. And I know why they're saying it. It's a tactical reason. But for them to be saying so publicly, they know what the outcome is, that's a pretty unusual development in what has been an unusual campaign.
Yeah, the little dust-up we saw between them today, you got a sort of a taste of that in the French language debate, right? When Mr. Singh looked at Mr. Blanchet and said, you were as useless as the monarchy in this minority, because he wants to use them as a contrast point. But like outside of Berthier, Masconanger, and Rosemont on the island of Montreal, they're just not fighting with each other, right? So it is the most presidentialized election, I feel like, I've certainly covered, you know, in that it is this binary choice with Carney and Poilievre going into the final weekend. And Carney seems to be on a more offensive tour in the final days with a little bit of defense and motivating for Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, and people wonder, well, how can you say that? You don't know what the outcome is. That's right, we don't. Nope. But parties are deciding where to go based on what their own internal polling is telling them. And so you can detect things from that, right? You see where Mr. Poilievre is, Saskatchewan. Sure, he hadn't been there yet. If you were really concerned, though, about trying to form government, I think, you know, you would take a pass and say, we know Saskatchewan likes us, we're good there, and you would go and hit some places that were more battle-rich. The fact that he is in Alberta, I think, is also a telling sign. I'm not saying he's going to lose people in Alberta. I'm just saying that he is reverting back to traditional bases of support for the Conservatives. And if that is where he is spending his time in these last days, that tells me that they aren't incredibly hopeful about things. And for Mr. Carney, yeah, you're right. You know, he was in Winnipeg and Leah Gazan's riding last night.
Following Jagmeet Singh because he wants his seats.
Yeah, he is going after any kind of orange seat he can. He is, as Chantal Hébert said at issue last night, hunting for that majority, that they are looking for ways to break through that 172 and see whether they can get it. I did have to take a minute. Yeah. And I think you can also see with the energy of that campaign that they think that they are on a good path as well. Like, he's going to now cover the country in the last couple of days and try and create a sense of energy and momentum to convince people that he has this. You know, the danger for the Liberals here, and there is a danger, is that people think that it's done, that it's won, even their own supporters, and that those supporters don't show up don't show out, and that argument that the Bloc and the NDP are making, that does start to hold some weight for people, and so they do return to sort of their natural home base, voter base, and then everything gets upended again, right?
Yeah.
Because there are a few days left, and we don't know how many people are going to vote on Monday, and it could still change things. But in order for it to change dramatically, those numbers from the Bloc and the NDP have to come up, and I think we're just at a place right now where time is running out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting as the results come in on Monday night. Like we start obviously with Atlantic Canada. The polls close there first. That's a conservative liberal area, right? The New Democrats are probably not going to bust through there, and the Liberals will probably win a significant majority of the seats in Atlantic Canada. In terms of whether or not the complacency has set in, and whether the counter-arguments of Singh and Blanchet, we'll start seeing that in Montreal right away, southwestern Ontario, and across the prairies. But we may not know the final answer until British Columbia, just depending on how it goes, because that's where the NDP power base, such as it is, remains, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that struck me today and yesterday is Mr. Poilievre's argument around change. And again, change is the ultimate driver of voters. Like, if people are sick of a government, that's the thing that flips them. And again, that is not really where Mr. Poilievre started, right? He started by talking about some issues, but not punching that argument as hard as he could and as hard as he has in these last days. Maybe that'll make a difference for some people.
It's more about the fourth Liberal majority or mandate now, rather than Mark Carney's just like Justin Trudeau, when there's stylistic and quantitative differences. So
well, and also because that didn't seem to matter. That didn't seem to resonate with voters who have frankly moved on from Justin Trudeau and who are looking at different options now. So I don't know whether that change argument will penetrate into the electorate over the next few days, but it is still, I think, the strongest argument that the Conservatives have. And you're right, for Mr. Carney, it remains about President Trump. And anytime President Trump speaks, today in that Time magazine interview, it is, again, a galvanizing motivator for Mr. Carney and what he's putting on the table in terms of how to take it on. But you're right, it could be British Columbia this time that gives us a clearer picture of what the country wants.
I'm at risk of looking ahead past Monday. To talk about change, if the data is right, and if the trend lines continue, and it is a Mark Carney majority-led Liberal government, majority Liberal government, I mean, Jagmeet Singh, Mr. Blanchet, Mr. Poilievre, like, there is so much potential change. After Justin Trudeau quit on January 6th, we could be in a whole cycle of just change in national leadership and transformation that just will keep spilling out in the wake of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, the whole political landscape could be dramatically upended, either because parties don't do well, or because leaders decide that they can't continue, or their caucus decides they don't want them. This, as you and I have talked about so many times, the number of things that have triggered this cascade of events, it is not over. Like, it is not over. You put aside who gets to form government on Monday night, Tuesday, all the other dominoes that are going to fall after that happens, I think, will be significant and fascinating in terms of how parties choose to rebuild themselves and reshape themselves based on what Canadians decide.
If you had scripted what has happened since Chrystia Freeland quit and what's going to happen, they would have kicked you out of the writer's room. It's unbelievable.
It would have been a really good HBO show.
We'll find out. All right, Rosie, big day Monday. This is CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, and she's going to lead our coverage as the CBC has you covered on Monday for election night. Here at Power in Politics, we're going to bring you special pre-election coverage right here from Toronto, starting at 4 p.m. Eastern. Then Rosie will host Canada Votes, and I'm going to join her as soon as I can get downstairs. Join us for minute-by-minute updates as polls close across the country. Coverage begins at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 Pacific, wherever you watch CBC News. Well, up next, more than a dozen U.S. states are suing the Trump administration over the tariff agenda.
This is recklessness at another level. What the hell do we have on the Canadians? Mocking people in another country, one of our great partners? Talking about being a 51st state?
We'll speak to the Attorney General for Oregon about their legal case and how they plan to win it. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's, quote, not trolling Canada about becoming an American state. That was part of Trump's answer in a Time magazine interview reflecting on his first 100 days. It's only been 100 days. Trump has falsely claimed the U.S. spends billions of dollars to support Canada, saying Canada wouldn't face tariffs if it were, in fact, the 51st state. Meanwhile, 12 actual states are now suing Trump over this tariff war, arguing the basis for it is unlawful. The lawsuit reads, for whatever reason he finds convenient to declare an emergency, the president has upended the constitutional order and brought chaos to the American economy. Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield is leading this lawsuit, and he joins me now. Dan Rayfield, it's good to meet you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
The White House has called this legal action a witch hunt by Democrats, which is an interesting choice of words. Why was it important for you to bring this case forward?
Well, first of all, when you call something a witch hunt, you're already on the defensive because you know what you're doing is not constitutional. It was incredibly important for the state of Oregon and, frankly, all the states that had joined because this is impacting human beings in our communities. Here in Oregon, we always think about tariffs as being something distant, but it impacts us in community. And there's an economist in Oregon who has done the back of the napkin estimates, and it shows that $3,800 will be the increase for average households for everyday goods. And I don't know very many families that can afford that. And that's why it was critical. We have the nurseries industry here in Oregon where people in Canada are pulling our products off the shelves. We're talking relationships for more than 40 years. It's a big deal down here.
Yeah, I can tell you, like, my shopping habits have changed. People I know, their shopping habits have changed. They take pride in filling a grocery cart with nothing from the United States, not because they don't like Americans, but because of what's happening here. And the president is justifying all of this, saying that Canada in some way represents an unusual and extraordinary threat, something our government says is a pretext. How do you make the argument that that is in fact the case in this court?
You know, I've lived my entire life having nothing but amazing and fond feelings for Canada and its people and the relationships that we share, the business relationships that we share, the personal friendships that we have. And so this to me is just an affront on how we've operated, for decades upon decades as they're going through it and creating a needless trade war that none of us need, right? We should be focused on the issues in our communities, not some spurious trade battle between two, what I would say, ordinarily incredibly friendly and nations.
Mm-hmm. So where does this lawsuit eventually go, sir? I mean, could this end up at the U.S. Supreme Court? Is that the path where this could go? Because, you know, the concerns about the structure and nature of the makeup of that court. I mean, where does this ultimately land?
It could easily go up to the Supreme Court. We're starting off in the U.S. Court of International Trade, and then that could get appealed from there. And the genesis of the claims truly are that Congress in the United States has the power to levy tariffs, and they gave the power to the president under some defined laws under what we call Title 19, and they're very specific with safeguards to protect our economy. The president didn't want to put those tariffs under the traditional laws, and so he's misusing an emergency power to effectuate these tariffs, frankly, worldwide. And so as we are successful at the lower levels, I anticipate this to elevate up. But what's unique, and you mentioned this, right? You see the Supreme Court has shifted, but you got to remember that Republicans were the ones back in the 90s, President Ronald Reagan, talking about the importance of having a free economy, right? And avoiding these issues like we have today. So it's very strange that you have a Republican president making these claims and really going against the antithesis of what Republicans stood for in the 90s.
Well, he's not just going against what is sort of more traditional Republican orthodoxy. He's sort of overriding the authority of a Republican-controlled Congress. And they simply, like, you wouldn't have to take this legal action if Congress took back its constitutional authority, right? There's a political solution here if Congress stood up for what is Congress's job, and they don't seem prepared to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the challenging thing in politics today, and I don't care what country you are. We really hold a lot of fealty to the party that we're in, and I think that is counter to good policy. Right? Republicans in Congress right now should be standing up, saying this is not good for our communities, this is not good for our nations, this is not good for international relationships that we need in this world. And they're unwilling to do that right now. The Republicans are. You do have some Democratic members of Congress that are trying to curb the president's authority under the emergency powers, specifically my senator, Senator Ron Wyden. And so I think there is hope there. It remains to be seen whether the votes will be in Congress to do anything about it. And that's why we have the lawsuit.
So on that lawsuit, I remember last month, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, she was asked about why, fentanyl being one of the root explanations for these tariffs. She was asked why Canada was omitted in a intelligence community annual threat assessment as a significant threat to the United States. And her argument was that the focus was on the most extreme threats. That feels like an argument a lawyer will bring into court with them. I mean, is this part of the case you're going to make in this challenge?
Yeah, it absolutely will be. And maybe the only extreme threat is that you all have universal health care. I don't know what the real threat is in Canada right now, but it seems absolutely absurd and silly to me. And the lawsuit really addresses that.
I just wonder, sir, what are your thoughts on just what's happening with the relationship between the two countries? I mean, we're in the final hours and days of a national election here, and the president's comments about sovereignty and the tariffs has completely upended the political dynamic here in the country. And a lot of Canadians want to look more to Europe, more to Asia, and less to the United States. And long-standing, you talked about the tariff impact in your state, like long-standing business integration, cultural integration, academic cooperation. These things are all on the line in this moment. I mean, what are your concerns there beyond just whether the president has overstepped his tariff authority?
The first thing that I think we all experience in all of our countries, right, is that you have one party or you have a minority within a party that may feel one way, but that is not universal across the United States. Right now, you have significant opposition to what the president is doing, whether it's from independents, Republicans, and Democrats. And I think we as a nation know we're stronger together internally, but we're also stronger together with the relationships that we have with Canada, with Mexico, with the world. And right now, you have a minority of folks that are trying to manipulate emergency powers and sow division. But there is a lot of us here in this country that really are stronger.
Just one last question, sir. I mean, how quickly do you expect to get an answer on this, to get a full resolution on this? I mean, the court you're going to is one I am not familiar with. I do not know how fast something like this moves. When do you think you might know?
So we have 12 states that have joined this lawsuit. And the first step is to get a preliminary injunction, right? To be able to go in front of that court and say, you need to stop what's going on right now. And that takes time as we build that case. And we'll eventually file a motion for creating a preliminary injunction. The other thing that I think is important to note is that you have other lawsuits filed by even conservative organizations challenging Trump's lawsuits. And they filed them in other courts across the country. We filed in the International Trade Court. We think that that's the best place where we're getting in front of experienced judges who know the law so that we can get a fair shake when we file our preliminary injunction. So I do expect this process to roll out over the next couple of months.
Dan Rayfield, Attorney General of Oregon. It was good to meet you, sir. Thank you for your time today.
Very nice to meet you as well.
Well, it's the final days of the election, and party leaders are making their final pitches to voters.
I'm asking for your vote to stand up to Donald Trump.
Change, change, change.
We go to Ottawa to get stuff done for you.
We'll recap the key moments from this final week on the campaign trail with our weekly wrap. Next. Voters head to the polls in less than 72 hours after a short campaign period and a record 7.3 million ballots cast in advance voting last weekend. That's before all parties even released their costed platforms. The Liberals and NDP unveiled their full platforms on Saturday after a full day of advanced voting. The Conservative Party didn't post its platform until Tuesday, a day after all that early voting had ended. That, as reports suggest, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's seat may be in danger, and rumors swirl about tensions with Conservative premiers. Plus, a campaign that started with U.S. President Donald Trump is ending with him too, as Trump revives his 51st state threats. Our weekly wrap is back to break down the biggest moments in this campaign. Joining me are Michael Solberg. He is a former staffer in the Stephen Harper government. Zane Belge is a former strategist for the Alberta NDP. And Laura D'Angelo was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Good to see you all, gang. Happy last Friday of the campaign. Can you believe it? We're almost at the end.
Here we go. Cannot believe it.
Finally.
Okay, this week, on top of the major party platforms being released during or after the advanced voting period, there was also quite a bit of contention over math. That's a good way to end a campaign. Listen to this.
The choice is this: a fourth Liberal term with Mark Carney, whose reckless Liberal plan will add even more debt than Trudeau, or a new Conservative government with a responsible plan to save $125 billion and put us back on the path to growth and security.
There's a phantom growth that comes from the sky in his platform that arrives and changes his numbers, even though he doesn't have a plan to fight against President Trump.
Okay, look, I know you're all promised there would be no math, so I'm not going to make you go through estimated tax revenue and all these sorts of things. But Laura, do the platforms even matter in an election like this, the way it has gone, the way it is polarized? Does anybody care what's actually in the books?
It's such a good question. I hope they care what's in the books because it is important. And all of the platforms came late. Canadians deserve time with them, time to think through them, analyze them. But we've talked a lot on the show how this particular election is so vibes-based. I do think, Canadians care about substance here, but they care about substance around a really particular question. How are the leaders responding to Donald Trump? And that, I don't know if it needed a platform.
Yeah, Michael, I don't know if it needed a platform. It just became a platform that Mark Carney used again and again and again, and a reason to go get behind the podium and bring it back to that central issue. So do the policy proposals and the costing tables and the different accounting multipliers that were used and not used, none of that really matters in this election, does it?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, look, it should. It's an exercise in democracy. Voters should have a look under the hood in terms of what they're being asked to endorse. But I still don't think it matters. In fact, I have a hot take, and probably an unpopular one, because it's not democratic. But I don't think parties should release platforms during a writ period, because all it does is make them vulnerable. I mean, look, the Liberals were enjoying a big lead and a significant one, but they put out their platform, and by many accounts, it was unpopular or at least makes them vulnerable. You have, economists like Trevor Toome poking holes in it, saying that it's going to hamper growth. And then, then you have bad sound bites from Mark Carney saying, well, trust me, I'm an economist. I have more experience than Trevor Toome. Like, it just puts you on your back foot in a way that you didn't have to be had you not released your platform at all. And that's true of Pierre Poilievre as well. And look, if I'm in the driver's seat next time we have one of these elections, God forbid, I would just put out a political communications tool that broadly spoke to my high-level policies. Canadians aren't going to go through a profit and loss statement or through the costing tables. In fact, when I looked at the Conservatives ones, I felt like I needed a degree in rocket science to understand it. So I wouldn't release them at all.
So Zane, my takeaway from that is Michael is saying, let me run the next Conservative campaign and I will hide my plan from Canada. Is that your takeaway?
While the body is still warm, too, Solberg,
right?
this is what a pitch. I mean, listen, if we didn't have costed platforms, wherein would we have Mark Carney talking about phantom growth like he was reading an audiobook? I mean, listen, at the end of this day, I don't know why any of these parties released them, because Mike's last point, I think, is a very important one. We're in a campaign where you're communicating. And communicating means when you've already sold people, you stop selling.
And that's a lesson for the Liberals here, which is they opened up a vulnerability. And of course, Mark Carney continues to be a very lucky man, so he's not going to pay a political price for it, you know, or at least it seems like he isn't. But he opened himself up to a massive vulnerability by adding a lot of Trudeau-era style programs to it, talking about a debt and deficit number that people are going to look backwards rather than forwards in terms of his leadership too. And then with the Conservatives, honestly, I don't know why they did this, because not only is it the bad headlines and the questioning around, you know, their tax cut versus a Liberal one potentially being better in the short term and all these sub-narratives, but they burnt a day on it, a day they really needed to turn things around. And I don't think anyone in the Conservative camp thought the platform was going to turn things around. It was almost like one of those, we have to do it, so we're doing it, and we're doing it on a day that we just are going to burn on this thing and see what happens because of it. And I think that's a really poor way to run a campaign, which is the obligatory we have to do it day. Who says you have to do it? There is no broader Bible that decrees upon you, any political party, that this is something you have to do. And I think more and more campaigns will have to start looking at this as not a day to be defensive, but as a day to say, let's just take whatever hit we're going to not release a platform and do something on the offensive. I think that's going to start becoming the new culture of campaigns going forward, because I don't think any of the three parties, you know, despite the amazing proposals that they all had a good day when they dropped their particular policy platform for Canadians.
Yeah, look, I think platforms, costing transparency, it is important for people to understand where you're going. So when I say it doesn't matter, I mean, I don't know if that's what mattered to voters in making their choice. Not that but, you know, Laura, there are, I think Mark Carney wanted to show he has a serious plan for the economy. It's a Trudeau-style deficit, but it's on economic spending, which is not Trudeau-style, you know. And I was surprised that Pierre Poilievre came so late, given they'd asked for an election for so long. You would think they would be able to hit day one with a clear plan, right? But do we go back to UK-style manifestos next time? What do you think?
I don't know, but it's a great point. They had 2 years to put this platform together, and they were begging for an election for 2 years, and instead we got 30 pages, I think only 17 of which had policy on them. The rest were pictures of Pierre Poilievre. Like, it really was just like a lookbook of him. And the reality is he didn't talk about Donald Trump or the U.S. very much. And we know that's not the ballot question that Pierre Poilievre wants, but it seems to be the ballot question he's getting, especially given the, you know, the last 24 hours or so. And so it's really surprising that they didn't put a little bit more in the window. And you know, there was a lot in the Liberal platform that, to Michael's point, did get picked apart, and Zane's, but there were some really interesting social policy pieces in there as well. You know, I have to highlight, as an IVF mom, I have to highlight the fact that in that platform, they have $20,000 for one round of IVF to every Canadian. You do not have to be diagnosed with a condition. This applies to same-sex couples. It applies to all families. There are some really big pieces in that Liberal platform that also are not getting attention as a result.
Okay, interesting. Some things that are getting attention, though. We spoke last week about what was going on between Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre. Well, this week it's gone east. Sources told CBC, and this has also been reported on the Globe and Mail, of tensions between Poilievre's people and Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston. And yesterday, when reporters asked Ford whether a recent video for Houston was maybe a test for a federal leadership bid, this is how Ford responded.
Let's see what happens. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, and let's see what happens on the 28th. But that's what I can say about that.
All right, so Michael, unlike you, Doug Ford's not getting ahead of himself. Like, he's got this smile at the end. I mean, he's close with Tim Houston. What do you make of this story coming out that, you know, Jenny Byrne was fighting with Tim Houston's people? Like, this friction narrative just keeps popping up throughout this campaign.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, of course, I don't know who the sources are here. I suspect they haven't been door knocking or haven't donated or haven't worked with the Conservatives in a long time, because if they had, they would know that Premier Houston's principal secretary is downstairs below the Conservative war room right now, working on electing Pierre Poilievre as the next Prime Minister.
Steve Chowdhury, if I got that name right? Am I saying that right?
Exactly. And Premier Houston's wife is working on a Pierre Poilievre local campaign in Nova Scotia. And I'll add that Pierre Poilievre has spoken to Premier Houston before and during the campaign. So no, this is noise. This isn't a real story. It's fun to talk about, but it's not real. And I won't say any more than that.
Okay, Zane, I heard some of this when I was in Nova Scotia for the provincial election. You know, I never got to the point where we reported it because there's always a bit of tension going on in election cycles, and you might distance yourself from the federal party for different reasons, like the Liberals did it with Trudeau at that time. But, you know, what do you make of this coming out at this stage in the campaign?
Yeah, I don't know if it's strategic or not, if someone's trying to make a point or not. I wouldn't speculate too much about that, other than to point out that, you know, there has been, when we entered the Pierre Poilievre leadership race back in 2022, we really did call it like a soul-searching mission for what the Conservatives were going to be. And because Pierre's victory was so, you know, unanimous and so singular that he crushed the competition, it was very clear that it was going to be, we're going to be populist Conservatives. But that didn't mean that all the progressive Conservatives, whether in title or in just pure sentiment, went away. And part of me wonders right now if this is a bit of a revival or a rearing of the head of those who weren't necessarily bought in to the type of conservatism Pierre Poilievre was selling, not just today, that's leading him to an election result that may look like a loss, but also may just have to keep their mouth shut in 2022 because he was so undeniable, and in 2023 and 4 because he was so undeniable. There is something to be said to that there are type of conservatives across the country, Ontario, Nova Scotia, even here in Alberta, that look at the politics of Pierre Poilievre and say, well, okay, this is a slam dunk, but now it's not so much a slam dunk, and these people maybe have a bit more wind behind their back to speak up, whether they put out videos strategic or not.
Yeah, Laura, there have been a lot of Conservatives I've talked to over the years who have been tough on text but soft on television, you know, which tells you something about the dynamic going on in the party. I don't think from this video Tim Houston's gunning for the federal job. I just think he wanted to do a pro-Nova Scotia thing because he is a very patriotic blue-noser, right? I mean, what are your thoughts, though, on the tensions in the back rooms that have been reported here?
I think that Zane is hitting the nose on the head, or hitting it, right? Like, I think there's a bit of a war happening with Conservatives across Canada because to a certain extent, the vision of conservatism that Pierre Poilievre has put forward is quite specific. It is populist, and it also didn't leave a lot of room for other Conservatives across the country to insert themselves into that or have influence there. And I think that worked great when they were high in the polls. But as that has changed over the past couple of months, all of the sudden, you know, Canadians and Conservatives are willing to push back a little bit and ask for something different. And I think we're seeing that come out, not really with these premiers saying the quiet part loud. They're still saying it quietly. They're just saying it with a really big platform.
Right. So, and Michael, just to close the loop on this, like, you know, when Corey Teneycke was criticizing the campaign, people said, oh, Doug Ford wants to be federal leader. And now that Houston's done the video, like, oh, does he want to be federal leader? I don't actually think either one of those guys intends to do that. I mean, and, you know, we don't even know what's going to happen on Monday. But I have no sense Premiers Houston or Ford have big federal ambitions. I mean, how do you see it?
No, I don't either. Look, Premier Houston just elected himself, and so did Premier Ford.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're both very popular. And, you know, I'm sure they'd be credible, have credible political careers ahead of them should they choose to do that. I think Doug Ford likes being mayor of Ontario, and I'm sure Premier Houston is enjoying the mandate that he was just given now.
Did you call him mayor of Ontario? Is that what you said? He has a municipal vibe. I agree with it. Keep going. Sorry.
But, you know, I don't know why we're having this discussion. Pierre Poilievre on Monday could have as high as 42% of popular support. The guy could be prime minister on Monday, so I don't think it's a conversation worth having right now.
There is something to be said, if I can quickly add, David. There's a difference, maybe a difference without a distinction for some folks watching, but there is a difference between leading the Conservative Party of Canada and leading the Conservative movement. And I think these two certainly want to put themselves in a pole position to lead the Conservative movement, even if they want to keep their current job, because it's very much about directionality, not so much about the title and the position in Ottawa.
You know, Michael, if we ignored all conversations not worth having, I wouldn't have a show someday. So we just got to roll with it, buddy.
And I wouldn't be here either then.
All right. Look, let's get to the third topic. This is Donald Trump. He's overshadowed this entire campaign. He's reinserted himself into this election in the stretch run with new comments on the 51st state.
I have to be honest. As a state, it works great. As a nation, considering the fact that most of the nation, you know, 95% of Canada, what they do is they buy from us.
All right, so Zane, you know, he was really loud, then kind of quiet, and then it flared back up. I mean, he is still the inescapable factor in this campaign.
And will continue to be. And you know, this will extend far beyond the campaign. So I think, you know, even his absence over the course of the last 15 to 20 days prior to this last outburst, many were like, oh, you know, this is going to perhaps not drive people in the polls. And you saw some softness in Quebec and in other places for the Liberals. But I think most Canadians have captured the fact that the unpredictability of Donald Trump is here to stay, at least for the next 4 years. So yeah, like, and I think it was perhaps a failing of the Liberals to maybe not kind of extend that narrative when Trump doesn't present himself every 10 days as a booster shot for you on your campaign. But, you know, he's here to stay, and I think this just adds to the further narrative and of the Carney question that he is so looking for, and in fact, potentially desperate for, that Radcan piece comes out in some way. Not to say that I know who the sourcing was on that, but it is kind of mysterious to see in the final days that Radcan piece of the Trump call with the 51st state comments come out at the same time when they need that booster shot at the end.
Look, Laura, he just did an interview to celebrate his 100 days in office. It's only been 100 days. There's 1,461 days in a presidential term.
I didn't need the quantifying.
Yeah, 1,360 to go. Your thoughts?
I mean, Donald Trump is going to Donald Trump, right? That is the one certain thing we know, is that we can't predict what's going to happen. And the last, 24 hours or so have proven that. And it also is serving to remind Canadians that they need a prime minister who can lead through this. And we know that Mark Carney can handle serious negotiations like this. He is an experienced person who can stand up to Donald Trump and lead Canada through this. And to Zane's point, it is fortuitous that this is coming back up now, but it also is, it's not out of thin air. There are rumors that Donald Trump is going to be in Detroit on April 29th, right? Waving at Canada. He is ready to start negotiating again. He is ready to start this back up. And whatever sparked his relative quiet over the last 15 to 20 days, Canadians can't rely on that. And they need to feel confident in the prime minister they're electing.
Okay, apparently, technically, next Wednesday is 100 days. So there's even more time left in the mandate than I said. So there you go. I want to fact check myself when I have to. Michael, your quick thoughts on this, a quick look ahead to what you're watching for on Monday.
Sure. I mean, obviously, Trump is material to the election. He's defined, arguably, the main ballot box question. But I think more so, we need to look beyond even Monday. I think it's the first challenge of whoever we elect on Monday has to walk into this mess. But fortunately, this is my thesis here. I think Trump is his decisions here are not going to be dictated by what Canada has to say. I think it's going to be dictated by what the GOP has to say, who frankly are at risk of losing their majority in the House come midterms if they continue down this path. And I think he's going to face enormous pressure from GOP colleagues, GOP leadership, major industry, his own cabinet. You're already seeing all sorts of signs of this. So I don't think Canada is as much of the equation as his own party is, as they're risking losing a significant arms of influence should they lose in their midterms, which is now just a year and a half or so away.
Yeah, the midterm elections could change everything if there's a repudiation of this in the Senate and congressional elections. Okay, let's have a quick look ahead to what you're watching for Monday when the results are going to be coming in. Zane, let's start with you. What do you got your eye on?
Vote efficiency. I think it is a fun thing to talk about as it relates to the Liberals, how efficient their vote is across the country, how 40-some-odd% can really nicely give them a solid majority. But what I'm looking for is actually vote efficiency for the New Democrats. I think there is a pathway for the New Democrats to poll where they are right now, high single digits, but still retain official party status by getting a good share of their incumbents reelected. And you've seen this sort of math work for them very recently in Ontario. And the New Democrats know how to do this. They know how to singularly focus their ground operation on viable areas with incumbents that are popular, make a case to those areas about why strategic voting is not necessary because we have these dynamics. And I think they can surprise Canadians on Monday with getting party status, with putting themselves in a position because of vote efficiency, not the same type of vote efficiency that spreads itself beautifully and thinly across the country to form government, but the same type that saves the party. And then who knows if the softness is true for the Liberals in Quebec, potentially have another role in the next parliament. So that's kind of what I'm looking at, is New Democrat vote efficiency heading into Monday night.
Right, yeah, they need a surgical level of efficiency. Look, we got 2 minutes left in the TV segment, and then we'll flip over to the podcast segment. So, Laura, what are you watching for on Monday?
I'm watching for two key things, and I'll keep them both quick. One is really kind of inside baseball. I'm watching to see those texts I'm getting from people in the Liberal war room telling me where they've been deployed and where they're volunteering, which ridings, because that shows where the Liberals are really targeting.
That's the targets, yeah.
Yeah. And the second thing I'm really watching is, to Zane's point, the vote efficiency and where those ridings are rolling in. There is a chance here that depending on where parties win their seats, which could look very different than other elections we've seen before, that the influence of power inside of the various caucuses could really shift, and that could drastically change policy across the country and decisions any incoming government is making.
Okay, Michael, what are you watching for on Monday, man?
Yeah, to Zane's point, I think the NDP could play spoiler in some ridings, but just like the PPC did, frankly, for the Conservatives in 2021. But you know what else can be a spoiler? An underreported Conservative vote. So what I'm watching for is whether or not we have these kind of phantom or quiet or even embarrassed Conservatives, as they're sometimes coined. And there's many examples of this occurring in the past, most recently in the U.S. Famed pollster Ann Selzer underpolled Conservatives, and we saw ultimately the results there. So I'm wondering if there is a quiet contingent of Conservative voters that haven't been captured in that vote, but who are going to go out on Monday.
Okay, if that's the case, it could be young men in particular who Pierre Poilievre is connected with and don't always show up in these things. We saw that in places like the Brexit referendum, and that could be a wild card going into Monday. Okay, I think we'll talk a little bit more about that on the podcast extra on this, but we're going to say goodbye right now here from the National Studio in Toronto to our TV audience. I'm David Cochrane. Thank you for watching Power and Politics. If you want to hear more of our conversation or catch up on the campaign on the go, check out our Election Daily podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts, and look for that special Saturday edition in your feed tomorrow. Hannah Mansing tonight is up next right here on CBC News Network. I'll see you back here on Monday, Election Day, starting an hour earlier, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a good weekend. We'll see you then.